Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving deep into Japan's Asuka period, pulling out the most important developments that shaped the nation.
Yeah, it's a fascinating time. We're talking late 6th to 7th century, and it's really a pivotal transition.
Transition in what sense?
Well, Japan essentially moved from being, a collection of powerful clans, kind of loosely organized around a figure called the Great King,
Right.
to becoming a much more unified country, with the emperor really taking central authority.
Okay, so this wasn't just an internal affair then. We need to consider the bigger picture, the neighbors.
Oh, absolutely. You can't understand the Asuka period without looking at the international scene.
Yeah.
Things were really shifting on the Korean peninsula.
How so?
Well, kingdoms like Baekje and Silla were getting stronger, which meant the Yamato court's influence over there started to fade. And at the same time, you have China unifying under the Sui dynasty. Suddenly, there's this massive, powerful empire right next door, exerting pressure.
Wow, okay. So Japan's kind of caught in the middle, geographically speaking. Did all that external pressure spark changes inside Japan?
It definitely created a sense of, crisis,
Yeah.
a sense of urgency. And that really spurred reforms under Empress Suiko.
Empress Suko, right. And she worked with others.
Yes, closely with Prince Shutoku, and just quickly, it's probably better to call him Prince Shutoku or Umayado no Jui rather than Shutoku Taishi, which was a name given later.
Got it, Prince Shutoku.
Him and also Soga no Umako. They really started laying the groundwork for a more unified state, driven by this sense of needing to strengthen Japan.
And reaching out to Sui China was a big part of that strategy, wasn't
A
it?
huge part. They made serious diplomatic efforts to sort of re-establish formal ties. Missions were sent in 600, and especially the one in 607. That was really significant
Why the one in 607 particularly?
because of the letter they carried. It was pretty bold. It talked about the son of heaven in the land where the sun rises, addressing the son of heaven in the land where the sun sets.
Aiming for equal footing, diplomatically.
Exactly. Which was a massive statement back then. It wasn't
Yeah.
just about trade. It was Japan asserting its own independent place in the world.
That does show a new level of confidence, doesn't it? And back home, Prince Shutoku was making some pretty fundamental changes to the government itself.
He really was. The 12-level cap and rank system in 603, that was a game changer.
How did that work?
Well, instead of just giving positions based on who your family was, it started to emphasize individual talent and merit.
So breaking away from purely hereditary power.
Precisely. A huge departure from the old system, dominated by the Gozoku, these really powerful established clans who held sway in their regions.
That must have caused some friction with those powerful
Well,
families.
you bet. It was a direct challenge. And then, just a year later, in 604, came the 17-article Constitution.
Okay.
This laid out a kind of ethical and political framework for the nation, clearly stating the emperor was the sovereign. And that very first article, stressing harmony, that set the tone.
Interesting. So it's both practical changes to structure and setting out the ideals of governance.
Exactly. And a lot of these ideas, this knowledge, was coming back from China, wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. The students and scholar monks who went on those missions to Sui China, they brought back crucial knowledge about how the Chinese system worked, its centralized structure. That heavily influenced these reforms.
Now, you mentioned the Gozoku, these powerful clans. All these changes, it must have stirred up internal conflicts, too.
It really did. And the fact that Yamato influence in Korea was declining probably just added fuel to the fire, intensifying the existing rivalries between the clans.
Particularly between the Mononobe and the Soga clans, right? That was a major clash.
Yes, a fierce one. And the Soga clan really came out on top during this period, didn't they?
They certainly did. They had strong ties with Torijin immigrants from Korea and China who brought all sorts of valuable skills and knowledge.
Right, the Torijin.
And the Soga also managed to get control over court finances, which gave them huge power. Plus, they were big promoters of Buddhism.
Which wasn't necessarily popular with everyone.
Definitely not. Buddhism itself became a point of conflict. Sugano Umako's push for Buddhism, his defeat of Mononobe no Moriya in 587, that was partly about religion, partly about power.
And he didn't stop there, did he?
No, famously, he was involved in the assassination of Emperor Sushin in 592. It really shows how much power the Soga were accumulating. Later on, Soga no Emishi and his son Iruka basically continued that dominance.
Sounds like a period of intense political maneuvering, with the Soga clan really consolidating power. But that dominance didn't last forever.
No, it didn't. Because meanwhile, China had transitioned from the Sui to the Tang dynasty. And the Tang had this incredibly sophisticated legal and administrative system called the Ritsuri system.
Okay.
News of this system, its effectiveness, was brought back by Japanese envoys, the Kentushi. And this fueled a desire within Japan for a stronger, more centralized state, modeled perhaps on the Tang with the emperor firmly in charge.
So pressure from the Tang example combined with resentment against Soka power.
Exactly. It all came to a head in 645 with the Ishii incident.
The dramatic coup, Prince Nakanosha and Nakatomi no Kamatari overthrowing the Soga, a real watershed moment.
Absolutely. After that, Emperor Kushitoku took the throne, and they launched the Taika reform. The key thing here was the Reform Edict.
And what did that edict say?
The very first article was revolutionary, declared that essentially all land and people in the country shall belong to the state. This established the principle of Chujikomen, public land, public people, taking ownership away from the clans and vesting it in the state under the emperor.
That is a fundamental shift, tearing down the old Gozoku power base.
It was meant to. The Taika reform, heavily influenced by that Tang Ritsuri system, was a massive step towards creating what we call the centralized Ritsuri state in Japan.
But those external pressures, they didn't just vanish after the reform, did they? Things got difficult again on the Korean peninsula.
They did. Japan's ally, the Kingdom of Baekje, was eventually conquered by the combined forces of Tang, China, and Silla in 660.
And Japan got involved.
Yes. Japan sent a large fleet and army to try and help restore Baekje. This led to the Battle of Hakusukino in 663.
Which didn't go well for Japan, I gather.
It was a crushing defeat, a major naval disaster. The Yamato forces were forced to withdraw completely from Korea.
What did that defeat mean for Japan?
Well, it created another intense period of crisis, fear of invasion by Tang and Silla. So the focus shifted immediately to strengthening Japan's defenses.
How did they do that? What changed?
The capital was moved inland to Umi, which was seen as more defensible. They built a series of mountain castles, particularly in western Japan, as fortifications.
Bracing for impact, basically.
Pretty much. But interestingly, the fall of Baekje also led to another wave of Toryojin refugees coming to Japan.
Ah, more immigrants bringing skills.
Exactly. They brought advanced culture and techniques, including things like administrative methods using wooden slips for record keeping. So even at a defeat, there was this infusion of new knowledge.
And wasn't this also around the time the title Tenno for the emperor became more established?
Yes. Evidence from wooden slips, these mokan, confirms Tenno was being used in the latter half of the 7th century. And the leader who oversaw much of this defense strengthening, Prince Nakanosh, he finally ascended the throne as Emperor Tenji in 668.
Okay.
And another key step under Tenji in 670 was conducting Japan's first proper nationwide census, the Kuko Nenjaku, all part of understanding and consolidating state power.
It really feels like all these steps are converging towards this centralized Ritsuri state. What were the final pieces of the puzzle?
Well, after Emperor Tenji died, there was actually a major succession dispute, a civil war known as the Jinshin War.
Oh, so it wasn't a smooth transition.
Not at all. But Emperor Tenmu eventually won out in 673. He was Tenji's brother, and he really pushed forward with the centralization project.
And after him?
His wife, Empress Chitu, carried on the work. Under her, the Asuka Kiyomihara Code was compiled, an important precursor to the final code. And significantly, in 694, she moved the capital again, this time to Fujiwara-Q.
Fujiwara-Q, what was special about that?
It was Japan's first large-scale capital city built on a grid plan, modeled after Chinese capitals, a very visible symbol of the new, organized, centralized state power.
So all this effort, Tenji, Tenmu, Jito, it leads to the Taihu Ritsuri.
Precisely. The Taihu Ritsuri, completed in 701 under Emperor Monmu, basically pulled together all the reforms and legal precedents from Tenmu and Jichu's reigns.
And this was the definitive legal code.
Yes. Japan's first comprehensive, systematic legal and administrative code. Its enactment really marks the completion, or at least the establishment, of the foundational structure of the Ritsuri state.
So maybe we can break that down a bit. What did this Ritsuri state structure actually look like?
Okay, so at its heart, it was about much stronger centralization. The emperor was confirmed as the sovereign, the ultimate authority.
Right.
And a whole administrative structure was set up. Ministries, provincial governors designed to govern and control the entire country, including bringing the formerly independent Gusoku under central authority and managing the populace directly.
And the Hennen Shuju system was central to managing the people and land.
Absolutely central. It was the land tenure and taxation system based on the Taihu Code.
How did it work in practice?
Well, first, they created detailed census registers, updated every 6 years. Based on these registers, every person, man or woman, aged 6 or older, was entitled to receive a plot of farmland, called kubunden.
Everyone got land.
In principle, yes, fixed plots. And in return for using that land, they paid taxes, primarily a portion of the rice harvest, back to the state.
So it's a way to ensure everyone has some means of livelihood, but also guarantees tax revenue for the government.
Exactly. It aimed for stable tax collection and peasant stability. And this system was the practical application of that kuchi-kumin principle we mentioned earlier.
Public land, public people.
Right. People who used to be essentially private retainers of the guzoku were now registered as citizens of the state. The guzoku's private lands were, officially at least, converted into public land, distributed as kubunden.
That fundamentally changed the relationship between the rulers and the ruled, didn't it?
Completely. Think about the old Yamato structure. You had the great king, then the powerful Guzoku clans acting as intermediaries, and then the people and land controlled by those clans. The Ritsuri state aimed to flatten that. The emperor, through the state apparatus, directly controlled the land and the people. It was a much more direct, centralized system.
Fascinating. Now, beyond all this political and administrative upheaval, the Asuka period is also known for its distinct culture, isn't it? Asuka culture.
Yes, very much so. It was a really vibrant international culture, and Buddhism was absolutely central to it.
Driven by that Soga promotion we talked about earlier?
That was a big part of it, yes. The Soga clan and later the imperial family actively promoted Buddhism, which fueled cultural development.
And you said international culture. Where were the influences coming from?
Primarily China, especially the art and culture of the northern and southern dynasties period. But it wasn't just China. There were connections, likely through Korea and the Silk Road, to cultures further west, West Asia, India, maybe even echoes of Greco-Roman styles. It was a real melting pot.
And you can see this in the art and architecture.
Definitely. Temple building became huge. Think of places like Asukadera, Shitnoji, Bushriji. These weren't just places of worship. They were massive projects.
Right.
They used new continental building techniques, foundation stones, elaborate tiled roofs, often built with the help of skilled artisans from Baekshi. And constructing these grand temples replaced building giant kafun, the old burial mounds, as the primary way for powerful figures to show their authority.
So a shift in the symbols of power, from tombs to temples.
Exactly, reflecting the shift towards Buddhism and state power. And the artistic style itself. Asuka Buddhist sculptures, for instance, have this unique look, often with influences from the continent, showing a sort of dynamism.
And the Torijin played a big role here too.
Immense role. You had monks like Iji from Goguryeo and Donchu from Baekshi, who were hugely influential in spreading Buddhist teachings and artistic styles. And sculptors like Toribushi, though Japanese, worked heavily in continental styles.
Are there specific examples we can picture?
Well, the Shuji Temple complex itself is a treasure trove. And maybe the wall paintings discovered in the Takamatsuzuka Kofun, the Asuka Beauties, give you a sense of the era's aesthetics, the clothing styles, the colors. Very international feel.
So putting it all together, the Asuka period really was foundational.
Absolutely critical. It's where Japan really hammered out the basic structure of its state. You have this constant interplay of international events, internal power struggles like with the Soga, and deliberate cultural borrowing and adaptation, especially Buddhism.
So the key steps were, see, Prince Shotoku's early reforms.
Yep, laying the groundwork. Then the Taika reform after the Soga were ousted, pushing for that Kuchikumen principle.
Then the crisis after the defeat at Hakusukino, leading to defense building and further centralization under Tenji.
Right, followed by Tenmu and Jito, really pushing through the development of the legal codes and the new capital.
Culminating in the Taihuru Ritsuris in 701.
Exactly, which established the Ritsuri state structure and the Hanin Shuju system. And alongside all this political change, you have this flourishing Asuka culture, deeply Buddhist and internationally connected. It truly was the era, you could say, where the mold for the Japanese state was cast.
Thank you for that incredibly insightful deep dive into the Asuka period. It's remarkable to see how these seemingly distant events really laid the groundwork for so much that came later in Japanese history.
Yeah, and what's fascinating to think about, maybe for you listening, is how these legal and administrative structures born in the Asuka period continued to shape Japan for centuries. What parts of that early state building still echo today, even if faintly?
Indeed, a lot to think about there. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.